Welcome to Lunch Hour Legal Marketing. I am Conrad Somm from Mockingbird, and this is the second business I started. The first one was when I left the University of Michigan Business School. I started a recruiting company called Tears and Sweat. And the idea was to take Midwest technical talent and help them find jobs on the coasts.
Learned something new about you today. And I'm Gyi Sakalakis from Attorney Sync. And I eat chia seeds and flax seeds every single day.
And for those of you keeping track, that is the 7th consecutive time in which Gyi's little tidbit about himself involves food, although this time not beets. This is Lunch Hour Legal Marketing, the show where Gyi and I talk about marketing from a digital perspective, your firm. Today is June 18th. And Gyi, I understand you are going Clark Griswold vacation style, loading the fam into your battered station wagon and doing Michigan vacation.
Well, it's a battered Explorer, but otherwise, yes. We are heading to Traverse City, Michigan and Mackinac Island, and we're even going up to the UP, to Tequamanon Falls and the Mucinex area. And by the way, listeners, if you've never been to northern Michigan, I highly recommend it. It is a beautiful area. You've got lakes, you've got nature, you've got hiking. It's a great place to be, and we're really looking forward to that. But that's not all we're talking about today. What else we got today, Conrad?
We've got some really exciting news to cover, and then we're going to talk about a topic you all love to hate: the entrance of venture capital, private equity, etc. into the legal marketing. And after that, we're going to go deep into Google's content directives.
Hit it.
Welcome to Lunch Hour Legal Marketing, teaching you how to promote, market, and make fat stacks for your legal practice. Here on Legal Talk Network.
All right, everybody, welcome to Lunch Hour Legal Marketing. Let's hit the news. Breaking news brought to you by Lunch Hour Legal Marketing. We're going to share some news that everyone already knew about anyway. Jason Hennessy's firm, Hennessy Digital, was purchased by private equity. They did an announcement last week, and I was actually pretty impressed with the announcement. We're going to go deeper into private equity and the legal industry in our first segment. The other thing that we heard about, Answering Legal, I saw this just yesterday, launched a free AI-powered chatbot. You don't even have to be a customer. So Answering Legal using a chatbot to try and build their database of customers. And Gyi, we finally, thanks to your weekend efforts, got the Lunch Hour Legal Marketing site up and running. Thank you for that.
My pleasure. And do go check it out. We are very proud of the Lunch Hour Legal Marketing site. And I don't know, somehow this domain, you bought this domain.
Oh, you don't somehow. You know who did it. You know who screwed this up. Call him out.
We don't know if this was our good friend, Jared Correa, but somehow...
But it couldn't have been anyone else, is what Gyi really means.
Well, maybe he registered it from somebody else. I don't know.
Okay.
But was blacklisted by Cloudflare for something, and it took us a lot of work. It was, in all of our years doing this, you'd think two guys who built websites for a living could untangle Cloudflare blacklist, but not as fun as you might think.
So the Lunch Hour Legal Marketing site is up live. That is where you can go to register. Look at this. I'm going to turn this into a pitch. Register for the Lunch Hour Legal Marketing Summit, specifically focused on in-house marketers, COOs, CMOs, director of marketing, those types of people, because we feel like you guys haven't gotten amazing content yet. That is September 22 through 24 in Las Vegas. We would love to have you. You can now go and actually get registered through the lunchhourlegalmarketing.com site.
And don't wait, because early bird pricing is not going to last forever.
Unless we can't sell enough tickets, in which case it will.
And don't be afraid to register if you're a lawyer. There was a lot of confusion about like, can you come if you're a lawyer? You can certainly, like we said, we're curating everything. Submit your application to register, and if we think that there's an issue, we'll let you know.
Can you come if you're a vendor, Gyi?
You can try.
Now, what's the best way? I'm trying to set up our next bullet point. What's the best way for you to show up if you are a vendor? What's the likely way that we would welcome you with open arms?
Be an existing sponsor of the Lunch Hour Legal Marketing Podcast.
And the bullet right after that says, hey, let's talk about the Ignite pitches. We are still reviewing applications for the Ignite talks. Those are 5-minute talks with 20 slides that automatically move forward every 15 seconds. We're looking for new speakers. We're looking for quirky topics. We're looking for nerdy insights. So if you want to come and you're a vendor, your best way to actually join us is to either pay Legal Talk Network a whole bunch of money or show up and deliver an Ignite talk. Otherwise, we kind of probably don't want you there all that much, right?
That's right.
Okay. All right. Speaking of Ignite talks, can you showcase one of our favorite ones that we already have accepted recently?
Well, I was super excited to get an email from our friend Joe Patrice from Above the Law, who has agreed to deliver a fiery rule of law Ignite talk. And I can't wait. And again, I think, even though the conference is for in-house marketers on legal marketing, we wanted to make sure that we tried to cover the gamut of law practice. And I think Joe's talk is going to be one of those that's going to be very exciting to watch live.
In the show notes, it says a condescending rant, which I'm looking
well,
forward
we wrote that.
I know, but we can make it. We can make that part of the title.
We were like, we want a condescending rant, and then we thought, who better to deliver this than Joe Patrice? And we are super grateful that he has agreed to join us in Vegas.
And finally, in the news, a little bit of foreshadowing. I talked to CallRail yesterday. They are letting out of beta their voice assist product, which is a competitor to Capture Now, which both Gyi and I have invested in. But the AI-powered voice intake game is getting hotter. It is getting more effective. CallRail's product comes out of beta mid-July. All right, if you are watching us on YouTube, please like and subscribe. Keep the conversation going. Leave a comment. And we are later going to be talking about private equity and the acquisition of Hennessy Digital. There's another episode that we recorded after LawRank was purchased. And if you want to, we'll put in the show notes, the Help My Marketing Agency was acquired. What to do when your marketing agency is acquired by money. And just as an aside here, we're really lucky to have Azim Nagare from Herringbone Digital, who was the purchaser of Hennessy Digital. They're going to be out at the Lunch Hour Legal Marketing Summit, and Azim is going to give us a behind-the-curtain look at how private equity thinks about the legal industry. I've known Jason Hennessy for a while. Congratulations on your purchase by Herringbone Digital. Herringbone is backed by Trinity Hunt, a kind of white glove private equity firm. But they're not the first acquisition that's happened. I can think of 4 in the last, say, 20 months. We covered GNGF's purchase by Scorpion. We also talked about LawRank and iLawyer, both of whom kept their acquisition fairly quiet. And On the Map was also purchased by outside money. And I thought it was interesting as a contrast, Gyi. It was interesting that Jason and Herringbone, which is the agency arm of Trinity Hunt, really proactively went out and talked about the acquisition. The other ones were really hidden. And I've even spoken to some of LawRank's customers who didn't even know that the acquisition had happened, right? It seems like some people are trying to keep things quiet and some people are getting ahead of the news and announcing things. At the risk of throwing you a softball right across the plate, why do you think that is, sir?
Well, I'm going to answer a different question, which is why would Gyi and Conrad be talking about this on Lunch Hour Legal Marketing? And they're kind of 3 different things that I think are at least three, maybe more that come to mind. And the first is, as Conrad has pointed out, is the juxtaposition of the PR around announcements. And I think that has a lot of applicability for law firms, especially as there's these mergers going on in legal and there's consolidation in legal. And we've seen some of these firms, I think, do a nice job of getting that the PR out, and others that have not. And so I think there's a lesson there for law firms. The second is for the law firm consumer, and especially our in-house marketing friends who are all often tasked with making decisions about vendors and marketing agencies. And these are questions that you should be asking. And I think there's also there's a certain amount of cautionary tale that, as Conrad implied, if someone's not being forthcoming about this kind of why, they should be asking yourselves. I think it also is in even beyond just agencies and stuff, like legal tech in general. You know, we've talked about this before, but if you're signing up, you know, you're switching your entire firm over to, we'll just for the fun of it, we'll say an AI automated marketing agency that's in startup mode.
Would you like to name names?
No, but
Rocket?
Point being that who knows if they don't have funding, you know, that's a thing, or like understanding where they are on their journey, right? So are they a startup? Are they established? Have they been around a while? All these things I think matter from a technology and agency consumer standpoint, and making informed decisions about who you're choosing.
I also get this feeling of fear and I mean, this goes with alternative business structures. It goes to the fear of big money coming into the legal industry.
Yes. And I would say this, I think some of the fears are warranted. I think the other thing that, as we were doing the pre-show on this topic, is I think there's a certain amount of stigma around private equity and venture capital that I don't know that is entirely fair. I know you have some thoughts, and why don't you start with some of the advantages that a shop might have, or a client of a shop who's been acquired.
Firm. I mean, it's not even about the agency. Yeah. Like here, I mean, this is the reality, Gyi. I've been doing this since 2006. I got into the legal industry and legal tech and legal SEO in 2006 when no one was doing anything, and I used to get into WordPress sites and change a title tag, and all of a sudden the phone starts ringing, right? And it was easy because no one was playing in the game. Everyone's playing in the game at this point in time. And there is value to scale. There's value to technology. And in order to scale, you need to actually have volume. And so there is a huge value in this. Now, interestingly, Scorpion tried to do this, right? And interesting, the guys who purchased Hennessy, they are ex-Scorpion guys. So Trinity Hunt brought on a bunch of ex-Scorpion guys. And there's value in the size. You know, Scorpion's pay-per-click engine, and I've panned Scorpion almost as a career, but they did an amazing job with pay-per-click because they had a volume of data to work with and a scalable system to extract the best value out of that volume. Now, the fact that they did it on to their benefit more than their clients' benefit, that is a sideshow, and that's why I personally never liked them.
And I think that's it. So I wanted to pick up on that because a lot of this stuff does cut both ways, right? So like the data thing, like you and I position ourselves as we've got data of multiple law firms that has value. Yeah. These large companies, scaling companies, they've got data, and so the question is that in and of itself a good thing for the law firm? And the answer is not necessarily. It could be, but not necessarily. And again, you got to get into other questions like how many of your competitors are they working with, and all that kind of stuff. The other thing, though, that I thought, I'm going to give a shout to Kurt London on LinkedIn. He was talking about, in the context of choosing a law firm, his whole point is when you choose a law firm, you're picking a business model. And I thought this is a lot of applicability to this conversation. He breaks it down with three, and I would be curious to hear your thoughts on this, and maybe maybe there's more than three, but he basically says there's a process firm. That's this fast food bottle style firm, the relationship firm. That's like the trust and connection firm, the brain surgery firm. That's like the super complicated catastrophic injury. Like these are the people that just know this stuff better than everybody else. And I'm not saying that any one of the companies that we've discussed necessarily falls into one of those buckets. And maybe you've got some other buckets, but I do think that if you're at some point, I'll say this, there are examples of venture-backed and private equity firms that becomes very clear that they're trying to build the process firm. And we've even heard from law firms that have been at other agencies that have been been acquired, and their biggest feedback was there was a noticeable difference that, hey, I feel like I've turned into a number. And truthfully, we've heard from firms that have said that even that haven't been acquired, as some of these other, whether it's agencies or technology companies scale, that there was an experience they had from that company when they were smaller in startup, boutique mode, whatever you want to call it, and that experience changed as the firm scaled.
So, I mean, it's interesting you talk about process, relationship, and brain surgery, and I think what the reality is, whether we like this or not, if you are not one of those things, you are in a world of hurt in the future, right? And the process firm, it leverages the value of volume. In a perfect world, the process-driven agency leverages the value of the volume by providing better results for their clients. That is what we would.
That's the promise.
That's the promise. That's the pretty picture of what is portrayed. And the flip side, what you did not mention in here, and I think this is why private equity can get a bad rap, is that it's about cost cutting, right? It is about taking big overhead out. And I'll look at and I don't know, I was not there when this happened, but I watched after Ava was purchased, they divested themselves of the large salaries of all of the really, really smart people at Avo. Mark being kind of the most prominent one, but there were a bunch of really, really smart people, and internet brands cast them aside, and they are now focused on cost cutting and milking in many cases, what I will call unethically milking as much as they possibly can from a financial perspective out of these brands that have gone there to die. Right. And I think those are the two ends of the promise of what happens when an agency or a technology or a law firm is purchased. Right. And if you are on the cost cutting side, the value that you deliver to your clients does not improve, right? And at best you become a number that might be getting good service.
Well, yeah, and that's why I liked Kurt's framing of this, because it's really like trying to figure out what's the best fit for you. If you're a firm that is looking for, it doesn't really matter to you, right? You don't need as much of the hands-on relationship, blah blah blah, or you're going to rely on the scale and the process and the data, but you're not. It's just a different feel for you. I think that's kind of the point here, and it's true even outside of agency world. I think it's true of technology. There are different legal tech vendors that have different levels of product support. Some people are doubling down and investing in client success and product support. Others are, we'll say they're not, for lack of a more kind way of trying to say it.
Right.
And so I think you got to find what works for you. And let's also face this. The cost that it's going to cost you as a customer or client of these various agencies or technology companies is going to vary largely based on what model you're buying, right? There's more cost it's expensive to hire the brain surgeon. It's expensive to hire the person who's going to be a, quote unquote, white glove account director for you versus, and also putting all these others aside, the AI driven private
Bingo.
equity backed, completely automated thing, right?
I was just looking up the press release for the acquisition by and I knew that I was going to find it, and you just said AI. I'm going to read this to you. Joining the platform enables Hennessy Digital to better leverage AI advancements and integrated capabilities across blah, 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 blah. Right? So like we are dealing with a new piece of technology, AI, that no matter what people say, no one's really come close to scratching the surface of figuring it out. And for a small agency or a small law firm to do that, it's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen.
I mean, Google and OpenAI are struggling to figure it out.
Right,
So.
right. All right. We'd like to hear from you. Ask us a question wherever you may find us, and we might just throw it in the episode. This from Mike Howard. I'm going to read this. It's a little long, but it's a great question and not an uncommon one. I found the latest episode on branding and rebranding really helpful. Quick question on the topic. It's not a quick question, but what about rebranding when going from solo attorney like the law office of Mike Howard to adding associates? My intuition is that it would feel strange and maybe even a little misleading to a potential client if they find me on the web as the law office of Mike Howard, and that leads them to think that they're only going to be dealing with me, but then an associate attorney might end up working on their case. Obviously, this can be handled somewhat by communicating clearly about which attorney or attorneys might work on their case, etc. But there's just something about the law of one person feeling like a strange, misleading name when there's multiple attorneys. I also didn't know if it might hinder recruiting attorneys if they think they're always going to be under my shadow. Maybe I'm overthinking this. Gyi, what do you think?
Well, you didn't read the rest of it, but I'm going to start with that.
I thought I was going on and on. Let me finish then, because Gyi's being critical. Let me finish Mike's question. I went ahead and registered a DBA as the Mike Howard Law Group so I could still get all the benefit of recognition that I built up through my name. Listening to your podcast made me second guess whether a rebrand was a good idea at all. I certainly didn't want to cause confusion by changing the name if I don't get much of anything out of it. Now that I've read that in real time, I understand why Gyi insisted that I read the second part of Mike's long-winded question. Go ahead.
So I think that was well handled by Mike. I think of other large firms that have they have the founding lawyer as the named lawyer. But I think if you say, whether you say law group or law firm, I think that does enough from the misleading standpoint. I think the really important thing, as Mike noted in his question, is how are you communicating that to potential clients? How are you putting that out into the world? And certainly the one that comes up all the time is actually the opposite of this one. And this is the ethics issue one, is there are a lot of lawyers that will try to do things like, law firm or lawyer name. So I'll just use myself as an example. It'd be like Gyi Sokolakis and Associates when it's just Gyi Sokolakis. And I think that one is pretty clearly misleading because it's just me and I'm implying that there are other lawyers at the firm. But I think that this is the way to handle this one is if you're going from solo to multiple attorneys, I think it's totally permissible to add either law firm or law group and associates or whatever else you want to come up with from a positioning standpoint. But being sure that you're setting those expectations and recognizing the trade-off. And this is just the inherent trade-off of this, right? Because this is we talk about this in the context of Morgan all the time, is that, we say bigger isn't always better because you're not working with John Morgan. I think as you grow, you need to be mindful of how you're communicating this and how you're doing those kind of handoffs and what expectations you're setting all the way through from your marketing messaging, through intake, and through representation.
My read on this is maybe simplistic. Every time you change something, you're kind of starting over. And there are plenty of examples of law firms named after people who it's a one-person firm with it's a one-person name with 200 attorneys. That happens all the time. It's not super confusing. I personally think that consistency here is more important than specificity. How's that?
I'll buy that. Thank you so much to Mike for submitting the question. And please do hit us up on LinkedIn drop a review. However you can find us. We're all over the place now. We do appreciate your questions and topic suggestions. Okay, now we're going to talk about some topics that are going to be featured prominently at the Lunch Hour Legal Marketing Summit. And this episode, we're going to talk about Google's guidelines on creating helpful, reliable, and people-first content and run through the self-assessment that you can do on your own content. And next episode, we're going to talk about Google's search guidance about AI-generated content. All right. So, Conrad.
Yeah.
Google forever has told us just to create great content. And finally now, with their helpful content update, they provide us some more specific guidance. What are some of the things that Google says you can do to self-assess your content?
So it starts with the title there, which is people first, creating people first content. The contrapositive of that is, are you creating content specifically for search engines, right? And you and I live in a world of creating content to drive traffic to websites. So one of the things that they ask here is, are you producing lots of content on many different topics in hopes that some of it might perform well in search results? This is kind of the long tail taken to its logical extreme. We're just going to vomit out content, hoping that something eventually gets picked up. And that seems to be a kind of cornerstone strategy for a lot of SEO agencies, partly because you guys like getting that tangible piece of content, and part of it because you guys have the Dunning-Kruger effect of understanding a little bit about the long tail concept, and you think it's might eventually work.
Yeah, and we've talked about this on many other episodes, and right now we're in the world of this idea of this great decoupling between visibility and actual traffic in Google. And, I think a lot of the sites that have tried to cover these big, wide array of topics are suffering. And the thing for me that I really wanted to help, try to help people understand in this segment is some of the specifics of what does it mean to create this people first content. And one of the first things that they say that you can assess, and we're not going to do all of these, but I think talking about some of these questions I think is really valuable, is the first one is, does the content provide original information, reporting, research, analysis? And so, how many law firm websites do we see where it's the same old 10 things to do after a car accident? There's nothing original about it. There's no research. It's not based on any kind of data. There's no analysis. And so I think if you frame your content from that starting point where you're like, what can I do that doesn't exist anywhere else, that's backed by research, that has original analysis, I think that's a great way to be thinking about publishing in general. And whether it's written word, video content, or whatever, like, it makes sense that Google would want to surface the stuff that you can't find anywhere else.
One of the other things they talk about, and you and I have kind of panned this, but it's at least a good framework to discuss, is the concept of EAT. The who wrote the content. And EAT is the experience, expertise, authority, and trust, right? And so that has less to do with the actual content of the content and more with the who wrote it and where it is actually appearing. So I would be thinking through the things that you can do to improve the expertise, experience, authority, and trust signals, right? And I also believe, we talked about this many times, that those are also ranking elements that impact LLMs, right? Because they are looking for that type of expertise. Now, is it the same exact algo? No, but like those two things do go hand in hand. There is a solid Venn diagram over that.
Hey, that's a really good point, I think, too, because we've been getting all these questions like, how do I rank in LLMs and AI modes, right, and AIOs and all this stuff. And and I even want to go even deeper for folks who aren't going to, they're just listening to Lunch Hour Legal Marketing, they aren't going to spend the time to read these guidelines. But they give you these 4 expertise questions. And what do they say in here? Like, clear sourcing, right? Like, lawyers know how to do this stuff. Source your information, the background about the author, right? Like your attorney bio page or your firm about us page, like link your pages, put an author byline in and link your pages to an about us and author bio page. Like that is how you're telling the machine, hey, this thing I wrote over here, here's what you need to know about me and why you should be surfacing my content because I'm an expert on this.
And that's why Gyi and I, at least a year ago, started talking about that this may be the importance for directories, right? The directories, this becomes foundational to understanding this. Another thing, I thought was really interesting in this specifically, they talk about how the content was created, and what they really mean on that is guidelines for working with AI. And they kind of equivocate here, right? They don't say don't use AI, but they also call for a disclosure, right? To ensure that if you are using a lot of AI, and there's another kind of really specific AI content guideline page here, but if you are using AI, to have some of disclosure for that is the use of automation, including AI generation, self-evident to visitors through disclosures or in other ways. So that I as we live in a world where it is very easy to generate blather content through AI, they're really kind of leaning into that because it's a huge part of the game.
And again, when you start getting a sense of how these LLMs actually work, it becomes so evident that if you're it's the juxtaposition of the original, well-researched, well-sourced, well-cited content. The AI is not doing that. The AI is going to give you another version, perhaps with a bunch of M dashes, of 10 things to do after a car accident. And so they're not saying not to use AI, but if you rely on AI to publish something in the way that you're not doing anything original, I think that's the issue. The other thing that I think that, and this is kind of one of those like Mythbuster style things, are you writing to a particular word count because you've heard or read that Google has a preferred word count? No, we don't. How many times have lawyers have called us and said, so-and-so told me we have to have more word count. And I'm like, who is so-and-so? Let's go talk about them on LinkedIn. JK.
Do you want to share so-and-so's name, Gyi?
No, I do not.
You are so kind. Listen, here's another piece on this, and we've talked about this kind of tangentially, but it becomes interesting. Does your site have a primary purpose or focus? We covered this, I believe, in the last recording, where the more specific your site is, the more likely you will rank for that very, very specific nuanced thing. Now, the flip side to that is the more sites you have, the more you spread out all of your assets and getting them to rank. So there is a very, very clear balance here. But this does become one of those issues where a firm that does one thing and does that really, really well is going to do a better job from a content perspective. The same content there is going to perform better on a focused site as opposed to, I think of the firms that are in those tertiary markets, right? That do they're the all things to all people firms, and they do family and they do personal injury, and they have someone who does taxes, and they have someone who handles immigration, and they have someone who handles criminal defense. Becomes more difficult because your site is definitionally a wide array of content.
The other thing that, and I know that we're going to be talking about this at the summit too, and there's some nuance here, and I want to let you kind of parse this, because when I read this, it could be misinterpreted by many listeners, but the question is, are you adding a lot of new content or removing a lot of older content, primarily because you believe it will help your search rankings overall by somehow making it seem fresh? No, it won't. And you've talked a lot about consolidation and removing content, not necessarily because of a freshness thing, but maybe make that distinction from listeners about old content versus off-topic content versus talk about your content quality assessment and instances where you might remove content.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to see that remove as kind of a negative. And I think that's because you and I live in this world of legal where you guys have just drank the Kool-Aid on content is king, right? And just we need to publish, and we've got agencies who are promising 10 blogs a week, and there's so much garbage on most of your sites. If you do a site colon search and you find that you're running 800, 900, 1,000, 2,000 pages, the likelihood that all of those pages are actually doing anything is low. The helpful content algo update specifically was a site-wide assessment of how much garbage do you have on your site, and that had a negative impact on the good stuff that you do have. So this feels like something that was written by someone who does not work exclusively in the legal industry, because by and large, you guys are sitting on too much garbage. And so removing so very bluntly, we remove content on many websites with the specific deliberate purpose of increasing search engine traffic to good pages. Right. We've seen this happen. We've seen it work, and it is a consistent tactic that we will pull out.
So I thought you were going to, I thought I was laying a softball up for you, but apparently it was a curveball. I think that the key points that you're making though is that when you do the assessment and removal, it's not simply because the content's old. You're not just like, check the date. Oh, it's old, take it down. It's an assessment of the quality and some of the indicators you have of that quality, whether it's getting indexed, whether it's ever been visited, whether, yada, yada, yada. And so I think that's a key distinction, is that we're not, Conrad's not suggesting that you just remove content because it's old. Because again, this is one of those things that we've heard people say things like, well, there's a freshness thing that so-and-so told me about this freshness algorithm, and I've got to pull all my old content because it's going to hurt the freshness. And again, that's not something that at least Google says is a thing. This is the hard one. This last, why was the content created? And this is somewhat philosophical, but I think it does frame there's some actionable ways to think about this. But essentially, let's read what it says first. Why, in quotations, is perhaps the most important question to answer about your content. Why is it being created in the first place? And they go into, it should be primarily to help people and not for SEO. And this is kind of funny, right? Like you and I, our businesses are to help law firms get traffic from search engines, in part, to convert into business for the law firm. Now, when you reflect on our why, it's, you can, is it a semantic thing? Is it a, but I do think that there's some tactical thinking here. And I'll also acknowledge, and we've talked about this many times, this is just what Google says. We know all sorts of stuff that Google says, and what actually shows up in the search results aren't the same thing. And this is one of those, and this feels back to this idea of like create great content for people. Like, what the heck does that mean? But I do think that as they move forward, and especially if you're forward looking, if you're trying to future proof your visibility and future proof your business from AI mode, AIOs, LLMs, that this is important, because if you're thinking, I need content to rank, to get business, you're probably going to end up publishing something that is not going to maximize the effectiveness of that objective.
Well, I want to put out the disclaimer that Gyi and I are saying right now to everyone who's listening through AI in Mountain View, that the only content that Gyi and I ever put up on law firm websites is to benefit the end user. We do not really think about Google at all. It is not something we do, and we're really only thinking about the end user. And all the other agencies out there are trying to manipulate the search engine rankings. I'm of course kidding here.
I type that into Gemini every day.
I know. So let me read the very last sentence of this article, and then you can take the context of who is writing it. But this says, if you use automation, including AI generation, to produce content for the primary purpose of manipulating search rankings, that's a violation of our spam policies, right? And so there is, I mean, I don't know if the focus of this sentence is the AI or the manipulation of search rankings, right? I'm not sure where that Venn diagram overlaps, but by and large, to me, the content question is to let your data, let your performance guide the answer. If you're generating a lot of traffic and a lot of business for humans, generated by humans, and you have a small amount of content on your site, right? Maybe it's time to add some more. Conversely, if you're blowing up content, and here's the mistake. A lot of you will publish, but never go back and actually see if any of that did anything, right? Is anyone reading it? And if no one's reading it and the search engines aren't looking at it, what's it there for?
100%. And I think to give just a tangible example of that, maybe we'll frame some of this. You're like, all right, I know that I have data that says people are searching for X query. We'll call it car accident lawyers or car accident lawyers near me, or car accident lawyers with the city or whatever it is. I have this lower funnel head term, my Google ads is telling me that it's converting and all this stuff. And so you're like, okay, you're coming to the table and saying, I need to publish content to help me rank for these keywords. And so you start creating pages on it. Maybe you do these quote unquote doorway pages where you've got all these different car accident pages with different cities and permutations and near me and all this stuff. And again, I'll be the first to say, we see this stuff ranking all the time. But if you're Google and you're designing a search engine or you're tweaking an algorithm, you're trying to distinguish signals. If you think about it, it makes sense for them to be trying to adjust their dials to actually maybe not penalize, but not reward the firms that are doing that very thing, that are creating this content for the sake of ranking in search results. And instead, they're looking for the content on your site and around the web that is original, that is author-driven. And I think sometimes us SEOs, we conflate these things. We think, oh, the reason you rank is because you've got this highly optimized page. But actually, the reason you rank is because a lot of these other signals that are not being directly influenced by the SEO who's creating all of these pages. And so anyway, I think focusing on your user, I'm going to start sounding like Google here, but I think focusing on, I'm publishing this because this is a question that potential clients ask me about all the time. I'm publishing this because there seems to be some confusion about this thing in the law that I think would actually be helpful to people. I think if you focus on that, that's how they're trying to tweet, even if they're not perfect today, right? It's still a blind 5-year-old. Maybe it's a blind 6-year-old now. Hat tip AJ Cohn. I think if you're trying to focus on where they're going, double down on the original, double down on the user intents, double down on the helpful, reliable, double down on attaching your expertise, your bio, highlighting where you've served in leadership positions, add the structured data so that you're telling the machines more about yourself. I do think that that's the place to invest more into.
So this has been a review of content and AI generated content sometimes showing up in what we will call organic search. Next episode, just a little foreshadowing here, we're going to go over Google's guidelines of how to generate content and feed that engine to show up in the AI generated results directly in Google search. And by and large, Google AI, those precepts, the LLMs, the way that works is fairly consistent. So we will get into what you can do from a content perspective to start showing up in those AIO results.
And if you love this stuff, go register for the summit while early bird pricing is still available. Until next time, Conrad and Gyi for Lunch Hour Legal Marketing.
Money makes a world go round. Money makes a world go round. Yeah, money make a world go round. Yeah, money make a world go round.